Now, my first reaction to this is, of course, again, we are back to Srpski Institute. I read in a book on Srpski Institute that they already had this. One of the ways to deal with dissidents was an injection, which for the some stuff directly into your heart, which for the outside observer, it was nothing. You just dosed a little bit. But for your inner experience, it was nightmarish, because the heartbeat was as if you felt a pressure was rendered difficult, slow, so it was as if you are a living dead, extremely nightmarish. And no wonder then they confessed whatever was necessary. There is, however, I claim, a much more disquieting prospect at work here. The proximity of the tortured subject, which causes sympathy and makes torture unacceptable, is not only a physical proximity, but at its most fundamental, the proximity of the neighbor, with all the Judeo-Christian Freudian weight of this term. The proximity of something which, no matter how far away it is physically, is always by definition too close. Consequently, what Harris aims at with his imagined truth beam is nothing less than the abolition of the dimension of the neighbor. The tortured subject is no longer a neighbor, but an object whose pain is neutralized, reduced to a property that has to be dealt with in a rational utilitarian calculus. So much pain is tolerable if it prevents a much greater amount of pain, and so on and so on. What disappears here is the abyss of the infinity that pertains to a subject. Okay, I don't have time now to go into how this reduction of the dimension of the neighbor can also be approached from the one who missed your emails from Giorgio Agamben's side as on the topic of Homo sacer. Just to conclude, I want to now go even a step further and against this background give you some thoughts of Middle East conflict. No actual politics. Thoughts. Many conservative, and not only conservative, political thinkers, from Pascal to Kant, from Joseph de Maistre to Walter Benjamin, elaborated or worked on the notion of the illegitimate origins of power, of the founding crime on which states are founded, which is why one should offer to people noble lies in the guise of the heroic narratives of origin, which of course render invisible the founding crime. With regard to these ideas, it is in a way true, I claim, what was often said. The misfortune of the state of Israel is that it was established as a nation state a century or two too late, in conditions when such founding crimes are no longer acceptable. And the ultimate irony, it was the Jewish intellectual influence which contributed, which made the greatest contribution to the rise of this unacceptability. During my last visit to Israel, I was approached by an Israeli intellectual who, aware of my Palestinian sympathies, mockingly asked me, "Are you not ashamed to be here in Israel, in this illegal criminal state? Are you not afraid that your staying here will contaminate your leftist credentials and make you an accomplice in crime?" Now, in all honesty, I have to admit that every time I enter the state of Israel, I experience a strange thrill of entering some forbidden territory of illegitimate violence. Does this mean that I am secretly an anti-Semite? Maybe, but nonetheless, I think that what really disturbs me is precisely that I find myself in a state which did not yet obliterate, repress into a timeless past the founding violence of its illegitimate origins. In this way, the state of Israel confronts us with the obliterated past of every state power. This, I think, accounts, maybe, at least partially, for the emblematic value of the Middle East conflict. It confronts us with the fragility and penetrability of the borders that separate illegitimate non-state power from the legitimate state power, since, in the case of the state of Israel, its illegitimate origins are not yet obliterated. Their effects are fully felt today. We all know Bertolt Brecht's motto from his Beggar's Opera. What is the robbery of a bank compared to the founding of a new bank? In short, what is the robbery that violates the law compared to the much greater robbery that takes place under the legitimization of the law? One is tempted to propose a new variation of this motto. What is committing an act of terror to a state power exerting the war on terror? When the desperate Western observers wonder why the Palestinians insist in their stubborn attachment to their land, refusing to dissolve their identity in the white Arab Sea, they demand of Palestinians precisely to ignore the Israeli illegitimate state-founding violence. This is why, in a very cruelly ironic display of poetic justice, Israel is getting from the Palestinians its own message in its inverted true form. Not only with regard to the pathologically strong attachment to land, that is to say, a de facto denial of the deterritorialization that allegedly characterizes today's global capitalism. I don't have time to go into it, but I think precisely struggles like those of Palestinians ask from us to rethink this fashionable phrase, deterritorialization. Maybe we should start to return to precisely territorialization, creating liberated territories as motto for the left. Now, what do I mean by this poetic justice? Imagine one were to read in today's media the following statement. Please listen carefully. Our enemies called us terrorists. People who were neither our friends nor our enemies also used this Latin name. And yet, we are not terrorists. The historical origins of the political term terror prove that it cannot be applied to a revolutionary war of liberation. Fighters for freedom must arm, otherwise they would be crushed overnight. What has a struggle for the dignity of man against oppression and subjugation to do with terrorism? End of quote. Imagine this in today's media. One would automatically attribute such a statement to some Islamic terrorist group and condemn it. However, some of you may have guessed it, the author of these words, I quoted them literally, is of course Menachem Begin. They stem from the years after World War II, immediately when Haganah was fighting the British forces in Palestine. Furthermore, it is interesting to note how in the years of the Jewish struggle against the British military in Palestine, the very term terrorist had for them a positive connotation. Again, another, even a little bit more provocative mental experiment. Imagine reading today in a big media a paid ad with the headline, "Letter to the Terrorists of Palestine," which would contain these sentences. I quote, "My brave friends, you may not believe what I write you, for there is a lot of fertilizer in the air at the moment. But on my word as an old reporter, what I write is true. The Palestinians of America are for you. You are their champions. You are the green they wear. You are the feather in their heads. You are the first answer that makes sense to the new world. Every time you blow up an Israeli arsenal, or wreck an Israeli jail, or send an Israeli railroad sky high, or rob an Israeli bank, or let go with your guns and bombs at the Israeli betrayers and invaders of your homeland, the Palestinians of America make a little holiday in their hearts." Imagine reading this. However, such an ad with exactly the same headline, "Letter to the Terrorists of Palestine," was published in 1948 in the US newspapers, written by none other than Ben Hecht, the celebrated Hollywood scenarist. All I did is, of course, I replaced Jews with Palestinians and British with Israeli. It is almost sympathetic against this background to see the first generation Israeli leaders openly confessing the fact that their claims to the land of Palestine cannot be grounded in universal justice, that we are dealing with a simple war of conquest between two groups where no mediation is possible. Here is what David Ben-Gurion wrote, quote, "Everyone can see the weight of the problem in the relations between Arabs and Jews. But no one sees that there is no solution to these problems. There is no solution. Here is an abyss and nothing can link its two sides. We as a people want this land to be ours. The Arabs as a people want this land to be theirs." End of quote. Now the problem with this statement today is clear. Such an exemption of ethnic conflicts for land from moral considerations is simply no longer acceptable. This is why the way Simon Wiesenthal himself, in his Justice Not Revenge, approaches this problem appears today problematic. Quote from Wiesenthal: "One should finally take cognizance of the fact that one cannot found a state without curtailing the rights of those who were already settled at its territory. One should be satisfied with the fact that the violations were limited in that relatively small number of people was hurt.